What is up, my What the Psychology family? Man, I have to start off by deeply apologizing because, y'all, it's been a week and I'm super late on this. And I am so sorry. It's just been crazy with friends in town, with school obligations, volunteer obligations, everything. But I have not forgotten about you guys because you guys are super duper important to me. So, last Friday, I was inducted into the Omicron Delta Kappa National Leadership Honor Society. Whoop whoop. Your girl is a smart one. I also got invited to another honor society, so we'll see if that gets accepted. I just think it's really cool. I like to, especially in my mental health journey, I am trying to learn to celebrate my accomplishments. Because we have to make time for that too. You know, a lot of times we get boggled down and we get upset about our failures. And we must know that it is important to also take time to recognize our own accomplishments. So that's kind of another form of self-care. So I know that you guys are waiting for me to cover the Manson case. I'm gonna make you wait a little bit longer because also this week has been busy, and like I said last week, I really want to give you a really good episode for that. Not like every episode's not good, right? Hope y'all enjoy it. But I wanted to go a different direction. Now this does still have to do with manipulation, so it does go into the spirit of what we have been covering anyways. So, few questions. Are you divorced? Ever been divorced? Have you had parents, grandparents that are divorced? It's crazy because a long time ago, divorce was not really heard of. It was a rare thing. And now it's just like everyone and their mom and their grandfather, stepfather, whatever. Everyone was getting divorced. And it's crazy. Now statistics are like 50% chances of getting divorced. And that even includes among religious people. Specifically, I know Christians. And it's kind of like if you were to get onto a plane and they were going to tell you that, you know, you have 50% chance of landing safely or crashing and dying, would you do it? Just think about that. However, on the other side, I know plenty of people with successful marriages, although I know plenty with not successful. And I would say even my own, even at being just 3 years, I would say we're pretty successful. We have our ups and downs, but of course there are ways of growing together, communication, having fun. Communication. Communication's a big one, you guys. You have no idea. That's one thing personally that we have had to work on, but it's always a work in progress. And there's one movie I remember watching, and it's called Fireproof. And it is a Christian-based movie about marriage. But in one part of the movie, one of the actors, he talks about how in his relationship, he sees it as like an educational degree. So we go through high school and we get a diploma, right? But for most of us, or I guess some of us, the learning never stops. Even if you end at your high school diploma, learning never stops. You get a new job, you learn new skills, you meet new people, you learn new perspectives, and in other cases, you move on and you continue your education. So what, eventually you get your bachelor's degree, maybe your master's, maybe you get a doctorate, maybe you end up with more degrees than a thermometer. I know, great joke, huh? But the point is we never stop learning. And in this movie, this actor talked about how he never stopped after his high school diploma. And the other actor asked, what does he mean? And he said he's always constantly learning about his wife. Like, he wants to get that doctorate degree one day. And it's a never-ending process. And it really made me think that that is so true. But in circumstances where the marriage is just unbroken, and of course, being a Christian, I have very different views about this. In my own personal beliefs, I believe that there's very few reasons to get divorced. But the unfortunate dynamic in the world is that it happens a lot. So we have to talk about it. But more specifically today, we're going to talk about parents that are divorcing, that have children, and we're going to talk about manipulation. So, stick around. I'm your host, Kitty Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. I know I totally went on a rant, but I just wanted to give a little bit of hint of what we're going to get into. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they experience this, but they never really hear that it's an actual, real and psychological confirmed concept. And it is. I believe it's actually in the DSM-5, the newest version of the diagnostic manual. We're going to get into this. Now, this is called Parental Alienation Syndrome. Now, I got inspired by this in a lot of different ways. Never heard of the official term, but I've had friends who have experienced this. I've had friends that have kids that have experienced this, and I know from my own story, I was lucky enough to be shielded from this. So, a good definition of this, it's an unhealthy coalition between a parent and his or her children against the other parent. So the innocent or targeted parent receives hostility and rejection from the children in this type of system. And the psychological health of the children is used as an arsenal in the other parent's twisted world. So in some ways, it's to get back at the other parent. In some terms, it's because the other parent is just a narcissist and they don't really care about anyone or their feelings. And we haven't really talked about narcissists a lot, but we'll dive into that a little bit today because in some cases it's just that parents are really mad, they want to get back at the other spouse, which is horrible, but in other terms it'll be like a parent years down the road and they're trying to figure out custody and they'll use this against the other parent to try to win custody or because they really just don't care about that person's feelings and they just want to hurt more. So, let me tell you about my story today, and I am very thankful about, I would say my parents, but more so my mom, because our parents' divorce, it wasn't really nasty at first. There are definitely things that were nasty about it, but we were shielded from a lot of the things between our parents. Both of my parents, they were both very good about not talking about the other person or the other parent in front of us. And if they did, it was just kind of side comments. They weren't really trying to manipulate us. But in this syndrome, they are actually taking the child, they are posting their own feelings and skewing their views against the other parent to turn them against them. And unfortunately, in some cases, the parents that are just evil and do this are the ones who actually are granted custody. This is not anything that is, it can be used against a mother or father. There are no boundaries with this. It really just depends. Even if the mother is going to be granted custody, they could use their children to turn on their dad so that way they won't want to visit them. So it's definitely crazy. It's very sad when you see it happen, or even if you have friends that tell you that they were a victim of this. Like, one of their parents used them against the other. And parents don't realize this when they do this, that they are psychologically harming their own children. And another thing is, most times it will backfire because your kids will grow up, they will become adults, they will have a better perspective of things, and they will be able to observe and be like, oh, they were wrong the whole entire time. And then that heavily affects your relationship with the person that was being manipulative the whole time. So, some advice?
Just don't do
it. Don't do it. So, this is a family systems pathology, which is a very fancy psychological term. And it involves the triangulation of children into the abusive parental relationship. Sometimes it says abusive narcissistic. but it doesn't necessarily have to be a narcissistic parent. So the cross-generational correlation exists between, so I'm going to use the manipulative parent and the targeted parent throughout this episode, just so we have a better understanding of who I'm talking about. Now, even though the manipulative parent may not be a narcissist, this is technically a covert type of narcissist abuse, but anyone could be a victim of this, anyone could be doing this. I mean, think about all the times you've gotten mad and you've wanted revenge on someone. That doesn't necessarily make you a narcissist, does it? In typical family systems of therapy, there would most likely be cooperation with the offending parent to break the coalition with the child and stand united with the other parent. But when you have a narcissist parent, this is pretty much impossible, and we'll go into why later. Because of the aspects of narcissists and their personality, it definitely hinders their perspective. Like, the way that their personality is and their traits, they just don't care. So, symptoms of this syndrome are, number one, the children sit in a judgment of the targeted parent's adequacy and competency as a parent. So maybe they'll say things like,
well, the other parent lets me do homework whenever I want.
Or they could say something to the aspects of,
well, the other parent told me this, so I feel unsafe here.
So they just have critical judgment, and they constantly downplay the targeted parent and their competency as a parent. Number two, the manipulative parent, they covertly encourage, empower, and reward the children for their horrible behavior towards the other parent. I have seen that before, or I've heard about that. Very unfortunate. Number three, the manipulative parent, they pretty much plead innocence in this process. Like,
oh, it's just the kids, that's how they feel. I have nothing to do with this.
When in fact they are purposely manipulating the kids and telling them certain things to skew their perspective. Number four, the children believe they are acting independently, so they believe that they're not being influenced by the manipulative parent. They think that,
no, I don't like the other parent, and this is how I feel. It's me acting on this.
But their minds are so undeveloped, and I don't want to say that in such a horrible term, but their minds are not fully developed. So for example, their prefrontal cortex, which contains like the judgment center of the brain, I believe we've talked about this before, but just to reiterate, that is like the judgment center of the brain. And it's not actually fully developed until we're like in our mid-20s.
So...
yeah, mine probably just developed a year or so ago. So, I'm fully mature, y'all.
So, because they're not able to see like futuristic consequences and proper judgment and proper perspective, they are so much more easily manipulated. However, remember when we first talked about the manipulation episode, anyone can be manipulated, but children are so much more vulnerable. So this system, it's created as the manipulative parent rewards the children when they say hostile or angry things about the targeted parents. And so they encourage and they display understanding for the children's negative feelings, when what they should really be doing is they should be taught to respect the targeted parent. Regardless of their own feelings, like, that's still your mom, that's still your dad, respect them. And it's really hard to co-parent with a mother or a father who is like this. Like, it's impossible because they want to do whatever they want to do. So in essence, the children, they are gained acceptance from the manipulative parent as they complain about the targeted parent. It's kind of like they're conditioned. They're groomed to be this way. They're groomed to take sides. And it's in sorts a numbers game as well. Like, we've talked about bystander effect and the effects of numbers, and you see a pattern throughout different social dynamics and social phenomenon that numbers does play a big role. So if the manipulative parent is saying it, if there's a step parent that's saying it, and then another sibling or a grandparent on that side, the more people saying it, then the more believable it is. So who is really influencing the child? So let's give another example. If the targeted parent tells the child to do a chore and then the child resists, which does happen a lot with kids being told to do something they don't want to do. However, say they run to the manipulative parent and they complain about the mean other parents, the manipulative parent will sympathize with them and agree with them. They will encourage them to feel victimized by the outrageous expectations of the targeted parents. They will excuse the child from having to do the chore. And then the child is kind of getting sucked into this
warped
perspective of this alienation. The targeted parent is then outraged, bewildered, hurt, betrayed. And then the child has been covertly empowered to disrespect them, who is actually trying to develop them into a decent human being. And all the while this is happening, the manipulative parent just sits back. They effortlessly create this destructive coalition with their child. And the children don't even realize it. They think that the manipulative parent is on their side and that they're there for them. And in some cases, the manipulative parent will say that to them. They will say,
I'm on your side, and the targeted parent is on your side.
So then they turn it and they make that perspective skewed. They make that child feel valued and feel like the targeted parent doesn't care or doesn't love them. So then what? How are they going to react? They will react in destructive patterns. Their sense of being will be destroyed. And with this, the children, they are empowered to be disobedient, disrespectful, and disregard the targeted parent. And so on the surface, the children, they feel and they believe that they're benefiting and that they're winning. But in reality, they're kind of playing into the pervasive mind of the manipulative parents. Now, there are some detrimental effects to the children because of this
Warped
perspective. So first things first, the child, their sense of value is diminished because then they believe that the targeted parent is unworthy of being identified with. If the children have any interests or traits similar to the rejected parent, then the child will be forced to reject those aspects of themselves as well. So if I like playing piano and then the targeted parent loves piano and I'm admitting that I completely hate them, well, now I have to reject piano because that's an aspect of themselves and I hate all of them, so that means I must hate piano too. Right? So it's kind of like a slippery slope. So secondly, a child's character is damaged. They are being covertly awarded to be disrespectful, entitled, rude, judgmental, condescending, ungrateful, and hateful. So now the manipulative parent is training them to have horrible character. Third, the children, they then develop a toxic bond to the alienating or manipulative parent. And this is because as they manipulate them into feeling a lack of acceptance from them. Because that parent is so angry and bitter and judgmental, now the children start to worry that, is that going to shift to them? There are treatments for this type of dysfunctional dynamic, but it will not occur with a direct approach involving all members of the family. Unfortunately, you can't sit in therapy with the manipulative parent, the children, and the targeting parent. You can try, but the manipulative parent is just going to play it off like
nothing's happened
and necessarily show any signs of being the causation of the behavior of the children. So a different approach is much needed. This will likely require a lot of out-of-the-box thinking, and it is very difficult to pull off. Now, luckily, there are actually programs out there for children to go to, like kind of like a weekend camp, and it's about building the bridges back and kind of like unbrainwashing them, because this is a form of brainwashing. That is very important to note. So what are some ways that we can kind of fight this? So one of the first things is a break in the coalition between the manipulative parent and the children, which requires separation. Now, I'm not saying that is easy at all because all parents do have rights, and in some terms it's very unfortunate, but this must happen for them to no longer be manipulated You no longer put them into that situation. Number 2 is restoration of the bond between the targeted parent and the children. That can be going out and doing things that the kids love to do, no matter what you think of them. If your kids love to shop, if they love to play video games, if they like going to the park, if they have a sport they like to participate, you building that bond with them will help restore things. Because how can they love the sport of hockey, go to a hockey game and you both enjoy it, and now how can they admit that they hate hockey when they just enjoyed a game with you? So in a sense, to restore the bond, there's a sort of manipulation that goes with it, but not to the extent of damaging anyone, if that makes sense. Because remember, the definition of manipulation is getting people to do the things that you want to do. So it's kind of like the antidote. Like, if a snake bites you, well, how do they build the antidote? They make snake venom to use it as an antidote. So, kind of in the same sense. And then the last thing is a restructuring of the improper power balance between the children and the targeted parent back to wholeness. Which, I mean, that can be even hard too, but you have to do these in steps. And of course, there are more things to do this, like there are suggestions, and I'm going to go over those too, because it's very important. Like, people that are struggling with this right now, or people think that their children are starting to be manipulated, these are things to really look out for. Go over the signs and symptoms of this too. I mean, we've already went over a few, but usually it's something that is all of a sudden that happens. If a child, their majority of their life, they've been happy and cheerful and they've just been so compassionate towards you and loving, and then all of a sudden they just hate you, and it's after spending time with the other parent and things like that, and now you're going through a nasty divorce. Well, what's really going on here? And sometimes children will claim that
I felt this way for a long time.
Or
I felt this for a few years now, and I'm just now feel like I'm able to express myself.
well, I mean, that could be true, but if you're a great parent, which I'm assuming that you are, you would have already taught your children how to express themselves. And honestly, if they were to express themselves in this way, if they were uncomfortable with you, and they went to the other parent, and the other parent was a good parent, they would let you know. Like, hey, little Sally is not comfortable with the way you handle this. And then at least you're brought to the attention of it. Like, none of us are perfect. We all have, like, things that we may be doing that other people perceive as bad, when really it's just kind of our own quirks, or maybe we need to adjust the way we say things or do things. Especially when it comes to our children, but both parents, good parents, they co-parent, regardless of the situation that happened between them. What I really don't understand is when people, they bring their kids into it. It frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates a lot of people. Whew. Now, the targeted parent, they may have no idea why their kids have just turned against them, especially if it's something that happens right out of the blue. And it can be something that is very disheartening. It can affect their own mental health, especially if the children are repeating things that their ex-spouse or whoever they're going through the divorce with said to them, and it's like lighting up trauma again, like reliving trauma or emotional abuse or whatever. And what is so sad is it may be impossible to remove the children from the manipulative parent, especially if they are narcissists, because they're technically not doing anything illegal. But however, that is slightly shifted in our court of law in some states, which is pretty good. Now in some courts, they are developing more about recognizing the syndrome and being able to put that in terms of custody and things like that. But it is very hard to prove. And because it is so hard to prove, the targeted parent, they need to be creative and figure out how to accomplish the 3 objectives we have already talked about. Now, if you are a victim of this syndrome, if you're a parent, even if you're a child who thinks that you're being manipulated, usually children won't know. And this doesn't even have to be this type of syndrome. It can be in any type of, syndrome. Like, it doesn't have to be parental alienation. It can be another type of manipulation. But these are some ways that can help maybe turn things around. Number 1, be proactive and do not believe that this problem will just go away on its own. More than likely, it's going to get worse. So you have to be proactive on how you're going to be able to turn things around. Number 2, realize that there is nothing that you can really do about the other parent. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. You can only change yourself. And I know that's like really horrible to say that you're being targeted against, and your credibility, your parenting, all of this is being targeted. You may be being told by your kids that they hate you or they never want to see you again. But maybe take a look at your own behaviors and modify them when necessary. And by that I mean, if your child starts to say something so horrible to you, one of the things when I was reading up on this is,
do not let it get to you.
Do not.
if anything, maybe turn it on the child and be like, oh, what do you think? Especially if it's in the early stages of this syndrome, because most times in a divorce or in a custody battle or some type of separation, kids are trying to fill the waters. And they're kind of inclined to take sides, especially when you are in two separate places, living two separate lives, under two separate rules and regulations. They're trying to figure out what's best for them, who really cares about them, do you both still love them? And so they may say,
well, Mom said that you were horrible with money and that you couldn't do anything financially and that you're in debt and all these things, like your money problems.
well, instead of dad reacting and being defensive and say,
Can't believe they said that, blah, 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 blah.
the kids, they view the defensiveness as guiltiness. Even though you may not be, but in their perception, they can't see past that judgmental type of thing in most cases. So the best way to handle that is to actually be like, well, what do you think? How do you think I handle money? And see how they respond. They may be like, oh, well, you're able to afford this house or this apartment. You're able to take us out to eat. You're able to take us to the movies. I don't think you're bad with money. And then you'd be like, okay then. Your opinion is your opinion. And that's all that matters. Very different. I know we want to automatically react in the defensive mode. And it's hard to say this because I'm not even a parent yet. One day I will be. But studying psychology, studying these things, I hope that it does make a difference. Because I feel like a lot of parents, and this is no offense to any parents in any or most methods that they parent, but I hate it when they say, oh, well, you're not a parent, so how would you know? But it's different because I'm studying psychology. And then there's some parents who don't even look into things and they just react to their kids. Or they parent them in such a way that it's going to be so horrible for the kids' mental health and shape their future. So, and I know that sounds super dramatic, but it's super true. There have been studies to show that. Anyways, moving on from that. Number 3, be a strong parent. Don't roll over easily, no matter how angry your children may be with you. Like I said, none of these are easy. But if you show your strength and that you show that things do not get to you, kind of like with the last thing, their perspective may start to change. Number 4, find ways to attach with your children or child every day, even if they don't want you to. It's kind of like in the military. It's called
Mandatory fun.
call them, text them, talk to them. Do whatever you can to connect with your children, even if they don't want to. So, number 5, be solid, be direct, be firm, be consistent, and be stable. Even if you do not feel like those things, fake it until you make it, honey. Act as if you do. If you're a brick wall, there's nothing that can break that, right? Number 6, if at all possible, you guys, find a good therapist who understands parental alienation syndrome and bring yourself and your children to see them. Seriously, I know therapy is not what everyone wants to do, but try it. Just try it. Number 7. I have already talked about this one. Use strategies akin to those used when people leave a cult. Because PAS is a form of brainwashing. I've already said it. It's confirmed.
Boom, bada bang.
Number 8. Take very good care of yourself. Do things that are good for you, that bring you joy, that are good for your mental health. Self-care is very important, especially when, and I cannot speak from personal experience, unfortunately, not yet, but I have heard that the bond that you have with your children, and in most cases, the moment your children are born and you lay eyes on them, you just instantly fall in love and you want to do everything you can to love them, protect them, care for them. And it's very hard to have that same child that you care so unconditionally for turn around and say they hate you or demean you and disrespect you. So it's very important to take good care of yourself. Do things you like, things that'll bring you joy, things that will de-stress you from the situation. Number 9. Do not grovel, beg, or allow your children to see that you are threatened by their behavior. Reiterating,
stand strong.
Number 10. So, this one happens quite often. If the manipulative parent encourages your children to disobey you, hold your ground, honey, and make sure that your children do what you request, stating with no disrespectful behavior in the home.
Period.
Do not let them slip, okay? Number 11. Develop some catchphrases to use with your children that you can say in moments when things are particularly difficult for you to handle. I find this suggestion kind of ironic because if they are purposely disrespecting you and demeaning you and doing things like that, why would you want to communicate to them something like this? But I am guessing that this is probably something you would use later. Number 12. Use humor. Be enjoyable to be around. Don't always take everything so seriously. I know you're stressed out. I know this situation sucks. But be enjoyable for your kids to be around, no matter how hard things are. And like I said, you gotta spend time with them regardless if they want to or not. So in those moments, just be fun. Be enjoyable. Use humor. Number 13. Be smarter than the other parent. Right? That also includes be determined and refuse to let the abuser destroy your relationship with your children. Do not let them win. You're smarter than them. You're better than them. Just do it. Be determined. Be smarter. Number 14. Educate yourself. Y'all are doing that right now. I'm proud of you. Never stop reading. Never stop arming yourself with knowledge. And educate your children as well. I'm not a parent. I don't know how exactly you would go about that. But I'm sure a lot of therapists that are around the world, especially those that do work with families and children, they can give you some really good tips. For me, I've been watching, especially doing my research, a lot of videos on this. And they know a better way to pursue this. Also, with this, maybe join a support group so you can get help as you deal with this battle with your children. And oftentimes we're isolated, we feel like we're alone, like we're the only ones who go through this. But in real life, this is not true. We're very much not alone. Number 14. Realize that you are dealing with a form of psychological manipulation of your children in which they have been brainwashed to respond toward you in a hateful way because they're being psychologically rewarded by having a pseudo-impersonal relationship with the other parent. And they perceive them as more powerful than you. And you know why? Because, come here, come closer. Let me whisper it. You're letting things get to you so the children think that the other person is more powerful. So, stand your ground and stay strong. Number 15. When you divorce or you're going through like a situation with a parent that is a narcissist or is just so hateful towards you, they can leave a trail of destruction in their path. They thrive on control and having a perfect image. Now, a divorce can shatter this notion, whether it was their fault or not, like they stepped outside of the marriage, say they cheated or they were abusive towards you or whatever, even if you're just tired of putting up with them. This can shatter their reputation, in a sense. So their self-perception can be ruined, right? And so even if there's like a custody dispute or something, and they don't have full custody of the children. Well, if they don't have full custody of the children, then they look like they're not a better parent than you. And then they have a loss of control, right? And narcissists, let me tell you, they have trouble coping with loss of control. And that leads them to create this environment, this chaotic, painful, destructive environment. So let me talk about narcissism a little bit, and then we'll talk more about this syndrome. In one of my classes last semester, we actually talked about narcissistic personality disorder. It is a personality disorder. It is in their genes. People use this term a lot. People say,
oh, you're a narcissist, or narcissism.
But let's look at the facts. Let's look at real definitions, and I don't understand why we name call so much. Why do we resort to ad hominem? I don't get it. So, people with real narcissistic personality disorder, and clap if this sounds like your ex, or one of your parents.
Or whatever, I don't know, your best friend. Hopefully they're not your best friend.
So people with this disorder, they are grandiose, they lack empathy for other people, and they need admiration. So these people, they frequently are described as arrogant, self-centered,
Manipulative.
and demanding. But they also have fantasies of being successful, and they are convinced that they deserve special treatment. These characteristics, they typically begin in early adulthood, and they must be consistently evident in multiple contexts, such as work and in relationships. I've actually, one time, long time ago, I had a conversation with someone who broke up with their ex. And they were talking about how their ex was a narcissist, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is, I wouldn't even say a few years ago, it's probably a year ago when I started taking psychology classes. And I was like, hold up, let me ask you a few questions, because here I'm in this psychological mind frame, and I'm like, let's get to the bottom of this. Are they really narcissistic? And I asked them about how they treated them, and more importantly, asked them, well, how are they at work? And they're like, oh, no one likes them. They're always on a power trip and this and that, and they get mad if they're not getting praise. And I'm like, yeah, they're probably narcissists. But for me, I always like to evaluate evidence before I just jump to conclusions. And I've learned that makes me very unique in this day and age. With social media, everyone wants to jump to conclusions. And I've seen this a lot with the recent cases and shootings and whatnot. Everyone always wants to jump to a side, and people get mad at me if I don't side with them, and I'm just like, well, I don't have enough evidence to really conclude what I think happened. And people get so mad at me. They're like, well, the video shows this. I'm like, well, things aren't always what you seem. They're not always as they seem. They're just not. And the media, another funny story. One time I was on an airplane, sat next to this lady, and, we were talking about life and jobs, and this is when I was in the military, and this lady she worked in the media, and she was a director of some sort. So I was like, oh, well, what does that job entail? And she's like, well, we pick, what angle we're gonna go with, and what things we're gonna show, and in my mind, my wheels are turning. I'm like, oh, so you're the one who creates bias, you're the one who picks sides, blah, blah, blah. They don't show the whole truth, especially nowadays. And it's crazy because the media, they're meant to expose things that the public doesn't know about. And sometimes they still do this, but most times they just run with their own agenda. It's really scary. People get so heated, they get so mad. They're like, well, this is obviously what happens. It's but they haven't even been to court yet. We don't have all the evidence. And then you see those same people later on when evidence is exposed.
And they're like, oh, I guess they're not guilty, or I guess they are guilty, or whatever.
The opposite perspective of what they're going off of. And yeah, so I always like evidence. I always like facts before I jump to conclusions. Even with my close friends, if I'm talking to them about something and they mention something, especially in my realm of knowledge, I'll be like, let's talk more about that. But it frustrates people, and I'm sorry, but that's just how I am. I'd rather have evidence and facts to come to my own conclusions, right? Sorry, I just went off on a huge tangent. I hope you enjoyed that. Moving on. So, people with narcissist personality disorder, or I'm just going to say NPD because
Words.
they often try to associate with other people they believe are unique or gifted in some way, which can enhance their own self-esteem. And in other terms, they will surround themselves with people that are lesser than them just so they feel like they have more self-esteem. Really depends on the narcissist. They do seek excessive admiration and attention. They have difficulty tolerating criticism or defeat. Which I have difficulty tolerating criticism or defeat as well. But that's because of depression, y'all. Anyway, so what are some symptoms? This is in the DSM-5, so it is a diagnostical condition. So, they have a sense of self-importance. They are preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, money, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. They believe that they are special and can only be understood by or associate with special people or institutions. They have a need for excessive admiration or attention. They have a sense of entitlement to special treatment. They exploit others. They have a lack of empathy. They envy others, or they have a belief that they are the object of envy, that other people are envious of them. They are arrogant, have haughty behaviors or attitudes. They can easily be stung by criticism or defeat. And usually they'll react with disdain or anger. But other times they will socially withdraw, or they'll have the false appearance of humility. And all of those are according to DSM-5. Like I said, they'll have a sense of entitlement and disregard for other people. They can damage relationships or have unhealthy relationships. Sometimes they will only have friendships so that they can use people. They also may be a high achiever, because they see themselves as perfect and successful, so they want to attain that image. So some of them do work hard, and they do that, but they do it in the sense to maintain their image, not to help other people, not to be better for other people. It's all about themselves. So this can have a negative impact on their own performance because they are very sensitive to criticism. Now, that's about as much as I'm going to get into about narcissism. That kind of gives you like a basis of what they are, what the disorder is all about. That way you get a clearer perspective, because if I talk about a narcissist parent or a regular parent or whatever, it can be either or, but you can see how it would be harder to deal with a narcissist parent. Because one, they just don't care, they have no empathy, they only care about themselves. They also don't care about the children because they just want to look better. So it's even more deadly in a sense. So, a lot of times, parents with NPD, they will use their children as pawns to get back at their ex in an effort to prove their dominance. And to protect you and your children and their best interests, it is crucial to understand what the Parental Alienation Syndrome is and what you can do if you believe your kids are being manipulated. Which, we already talked about what it is. So let's talk about maybe some signs or warning signs of the syndrome, or that your children are being manipulated. So there are several methods that can be used to alienate your child from a parent. They could say things like, oh, your mom doesn't love you, or your dad doesn't want to speak to you. Or there could be less direct methods. They could be blaming the other parent for the end of the marriage. They could punish the child for wanting to pursue a relationship with the other parent. They could move far away so it's nearly impossible to maintain a relationship with the innocent parent. So those are just kind of warning signs about parent in itself. For the child, these are things to keep an eye out for. The child unfairly criticizes the targeted parent. The child does not have proof or examples of the criticisms. No, they may make up things or have false accusations of,
oh, they were abusive towards me.
Or they could even say,
well, they were just a horrible spouse.
But what's your evidence for that? And if you say they abused you, What's the evidence? When did that happen? How did you respond? Did you say anything to anyone? And we're not victim blaming, because if that really happened, it needs to be investigated. But if you investigate it and they can't come up with anything, then yeah, it's a sign of manipulation. They only have negative feelings toward the targeted parent. Like I said, it's all of a sudden. They just all of a sudden feel this way. The child states they formed the opinion regarding the targeted parent all on their own. So they will say that you as the targeted parent, that they formed that opinion. But really, they were manipulated. They have unwavering support for the manipulative parent. They feel no guilt towards mistreating the targeted parent. They say things that sound like they came from an adult when talking about memories of the targeted parent. The child may have feelings of hatred towards members of the targeted parent's side of the family. So these are things to look out for. And I think I've already said a few of them already, but I think it's important to reiterate this. Like I said, this destroys a child's mental health. Kids that have been alienated from one of their parents, they are likely to develop higher rates of depression, anger, anxiety, substance abuse, and also have relationship issues. So those are consequences. So now that we've talked about this, of course, this is a true crime and human behavior podcast. So for those that thrive off of true crime like myself, stick around. If that's not really your thing, you can exit stage left. Just kidding. I love you all. I'll give you a brief synopsis of this before, if you want to not hear the details, because I know some people, they tune in because they like true crime and they like psychology, maybe both. Some just like the psychological aspects. So just in case you don't like it, just warning. This does involve a Texas boy from Katy, Texas, spelled just like my name. 10 years old. This happened in like 2004. And he was accused of murdering his father in the summer. And he is facing the unofficial psychiatric disorder that may lead to his father's death. Some psychiatrists call it Parental Alienation Syndrome. And they say it's why the son killed his father, Dr. Rick Lostron, that summer. So at this time, back in 2004, this was not an official psychiatric disorder. It is now today, which is important. So this syndrome, like I said, it's caused by a bitter parent who poisons a child against the other parent. And it's usually in the cases of divorce, custody battles, separation, blah, blah, blah. In this case, Lostron's ex-wife, Deborah Geisler, she accused him of sexually abusing the 10-year-old and claims which were denied by the father. He even passed 2 lie detector tests before his death. And the boys' defense team, they did try, or I think they might have tried to use the syndrome as a defense. And they blamed the mother for the son's crime. Which, in the end, I think is what happened. Is a legitimate defense. That's another discussion for another time. But I kind of think it is, because at 10 years old, they're so easy to manipulate. And the good thing is, most kids, they don't act out on their hatred. Some kids do. This kid murdered. Other kids will destroy property, their own rooms, their house. They will maybe have outright horrible behavior. They may be abusive towards a parent just to get validation from the other. So it really just depends. So a lot of people at this time, they did believe that this was a legitimate disorder. A lot of people at the time didn't think it was, but it was added, so we're Gucci. It is now a confirmed disorder. So this 10-year-old was being investigated. The father, he did everything he could do for his children. That's what his divorce attorney said. And, quote, he said, "This is a man that did everything he could do to help his children." That was his attorney, Kathleen Collins. She said the children were real happy with their father. They loved their father, and Rick loved them. Another thing before I get into more details. Surprisingly enough, I mean, I watch a lot of court TV and I get into statistics a little bit and things like that. But more crimes and more retaliation happen in family courts versus any other court. Versus criminal court, juvenile court, I don't know what else. Claims, disability, whatever. Family court is where it's at. That's where most of violence, retaliation, murder things happen. It gets really ugly, and you wouldn't think with the name of family court. but they're the ones who handle a lot of this custody, divorce, family issues, things like that. So his former wife, she lived about west of Houston, and Dr. Rick Lostron, he arrived there to get his 2 children, ages 7 and ages 10. Now, about 3:45 p.m., they received a report, the police did, that shots had been fired at Geisler's home. They arrived to find Dr. Lostron, 41, dead in his vehicle with multiple gunshot wounds. The older boy, sitting in the back seat, shot his father through the back of the driver's seat with his mother's .45 caliber pistol. Dang. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with weapons, but a .45, especially if it's in a compact type of weapon, type of pistol, that thing can have a lot of kick and be very powerful. So, and that's even for me, but I mean, I am pretty small. I have small hands, and I carry a 9mm, which I think the .45 is like a step down. So it's still a weapon with a good recoil, depending on how compact the pistol is. The smaller the pistol and the bigger the caliber combined is for bigger kick. So, I wish I knew what kind, but sorry, my obsession with guns. Moving on. So, it had been just over a year since the father and mother divorced. It was finalized, and friends say that the father, he was likable, he was trusting, he was a doctor, and he only wanted what was best for his children. But unfortunately, the couple's relationship did remain volatile. So, Harris County Sheriff's Department Sergeant B.E. Williams said an investigation revealed that when the doctor arrived at the home, his 10-year-old son went into his mother's bedroom and got a gun. He then climbed into the back seat and began shooting through the back of the driver's seat, striking his father. This is what the department said in a statement. He then exited the vehicle and fired more times, striking his father's vehicle as well as a neighbor's car parked near the victim's vehicle. According to the statement, he then returned to the house where his mother took the weapon from him and called 911. Where in the heck was the mom? Like, he went, got her gun, and started shooting, and you think after the first shot she would hear it or call 911 right away. Like, that's what a normal parent would do, regardless of like who is getting shot at, regardless if you're volatile in that relationship. You still have kids with them. You still were in love with them at some point. Like, geez, but ooh. So the mom, Geisler, she did not return phone messages from Associated Press whenever they were trying to get an interview, but she did tell the Houston Chronicle that her son was very angry with his father. She told the paper that she did not know how he got the gun, which she said she kept locked and unloaded in her home, which is about 30 miles from Houston in Katy, Texas. That town was named after me. I time traveled, and they met me, and they just saw how awesome I was, and so they decided to name it after me. True story. The father's attorney further said that he was just getting his life together after this devastating divorce process. He didn't deserve this, nobody does. His attorney urged him to get a police escort when he was picking up the children because the situation did seem to escalate further. So a close friend of his, who was also a fellow doctor and also one of his groomsmen, said that life was not easy for him. It settled down for a brief period of time, but not for a whole lot. The disputes, they were taking a toll on their children. And his friend also said, I could tell they were troubled. They were torn between both parents. During the divorce, Geisler alleged that Dr. Rick Lostrom had abused the children. He was kept from his children for 4 months, but he was cleared from the allegations. And another thing his attorney said, and I completely agree with this, it takes a lot to still stand strong after a person makes false allegations against you time and time again. He was vindicated at every turn. So here this man is a loving father, a doctor, gets accused of these things, is separated from his kids, which at that time the mother can really spend that time to manipulate them and could completely lie about the situation. She could say, because she knows it's false,
oh, he's being investigated for abusing another little girl.
or something. Like, mom can make up whatever she wants, right? And that's what these parents will do. So they did marry in San Antonio in 1988, and then they came to an agreed settlement in May of 2003, and the father received their expensive home, expensive especially for back then, $355,000, which I'm sure it's a lot more expensive now being in Texas. They agreed to joint custody with the children, spending a week with each parent. The father, he was a Washington native. He met the mother in college, and the couple married during his first year at medical school at Texas Tech in Lubbock. That's what his friend said. So, I have been in tears the last 48 hours. This is one of his medical school classmates, and they reunited about 4 years prior to this. All of his friends are calling me and asking me about him. So they both said that they had opinions about what happened, but neither would discuss them. So I'm guessing they're both theorizing that it was the mom. The attorney said, "I'm very angry about what happened and hurt and upset. I have my own ideas about what happened, but I think the police department can do a good job of investigating this case and find out what really happened." Well, after this happened, I know that his parents, the father's parents, the boy's grandparents, they had temporary custody until they could figure things out. And although this syndrome, it has gained credibility in the court system, and now it is included in the DSM-5. This is a good thing because when things are included in the DSM-5, that means that insurance companies are obligated to pay for treatment, and the court system would need to take measures to protect against this form of abuse. Also, in court cases, it can be recommended as well for clients to seek treatment, whether it's kids or the other parents or family therapy, whatever. So now they can be subjected to therapy if need be. So, wow, what a doozy. Like I said, I'm blessed to never have to personally deal with this in my own life. I have seen it though, and it's just very disheartening when you see someone that you love and you see them going through this, whether they're a child or they're a parent, whether they're targeted, or if they're a child who grew up in such an environment. Like, it just has so many negative aspects on all different fronts. So, goodness, have you guys ever seen this? What do you think? Should there be punishment for parents that manipulate their children? I know in court some of them kind of have been. They be granted no custody at all. So, what do you think of that? What measures should be taken for justice in this case? And what are some other ways that we can protect children against this form of manipulation? Share your thoughts with me. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, everything. Just reach out, y'all. Communicate with me. Tell me what you think. I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology.
Stay psyched, y'all.